Hello, everyone. I'm Caroline from Koala English Podcast. Today, we are exploring a topic that many people experience, but few truly understand: living alone. For some people, living alone feels like freedom. For others, it feels uncomfortable, maybe even a little scary. And in a world where we constantly see pictures of happy couples, busy families, and large friend groups, it's easy to wonder, is living alone something positive, or is it something we should try to avoid? But what if being alone is not a problem to fix? What if it is a powerful period of growth? Today, we are going to explore living alone from a different perspective, not socially, but psychologically and neurologically. In other words, what is actually happening inside your brain when you spend time alone? Before we begin the main part of today's episode, let's take a moment to understand some important words you will hear. First, you will hear the word privilege. A privilege is something special or valuable that not everyone has. It is a benefit, not a punishment. For example, living alone can be a privilege because it gives you freedom, or having quiet time to think can be a privilege in a busy world. You will also hear the word neuroscience. Neuroscience is the study of the brain, how the brain works, and how it affects our thoughts and emotions. For example, neuroscience shows that silence can help the brain reset. Or according to neuroscience, our brains change when we repeat behaviors. Another important word is psychology. Psychology is the study of the mind and human behavior, why we think, feel, and act in certain ways. For instance, psychology explains why we sometimes feel uncomfortable being alone. Or in psychology, emotions are seen as signals, not problems. We will also talk about something called the default mode network, or DMN. This is a system in the brain that works when you are not focused on a task, like when you are daydreaming or thinking about your life. It helps you reflect on your past, your future, yourself, and your relationships with other people. For example, when you are sitting quietly and thinking about your life, your DMN is active. Or living alone may give your default mode network more space to reflect. You may also hear the phrase emotional regulation. This means controlling or managing your emotions. For example, emotional regulation helps you stay calm during an argument, or instead of shouting, someone might practice emotional regulation and take a deep breath. Another key term is neural pathways. These are connections inside your brain. When you repeat a behavior, these connections become stronger, and that is how habits are formed. For example, practicing self-control strengthens neural pathways in the brain. Or every time you solve a problem calmly, you build new neural pathways. We will also mention the prefrontal cortex. This is the part of your brain that helps you make decisions, plan your future, solve problems, and control your behavior. It is often called the CEO of your brain. For example, when you plan your week, your prefrontal cortex is working. Or the prefrontal cortex helps you think before you react. Related to that is the phrase executive function. Executive function means important thinking skills like planning, organizing, focusing, and making responsible decisions. For instance, living alone can improve your executive function because you must manage your own time. Or strong executive function helps students succeed in school. You will also hear the word dopamine. Dopamine is a chemical in your brain that gives you a feeling of pleasure or excitement. For example, social media notifications can give you a quick dopamine boost, or exercise can increase dopamine and improve your mood. Another phrase is flow state. Flow is a mental state when you are completely focused on something. You enjoy it so much that you forget about time. For example, someone might enter a flow state while painting and not notice that 3 hours have passed. Or deep concentration can help you reach a flow state. We will also use the word isolation. Isolation means being separated from other people, and it can sometimes feel lonely. For example, isolation can affect mental health if it continues for too long, or living alone does not always mean isolation. Finally, we will talk about integration. Integration means bringing different parts together into one whole. In today's episode, it means understanding and accepting all parts of yourself. For example, emotional integration helps you accept both your strengths and weaknesses, or true growth comes from integration, not from ignoring your past. Now that you understand these key words, you are ready to explore this topic more deeply. Before we continue, let's also look at some powerful phrases you will hear in this episode. These expressions are emotional, modern, and very natural in spoken English. One phrase is flying solo. This simply means living or doing something alone in an independent way. For example, after years of sharing an apartment, she decided to try flying solo for the first time. Or he enjoys flying solo because it gives him full control over his schedule. Another strong phrase is the greatest privilege your mind can experience. This reframes living alone as something valuable instead of negative. For example, having quiet time every day can be the greatest privilege your mind can experience, or learning to enjoy your own company may become the greatest privilege your mind can experience. You may also hear perfectly curated highlight reels of togetherness. Curated means carefully selected, and a highlight reel means only the best moments. For example, social media often shows perfectly curated highlight reels of togetherness. Or we sometimes compare our real lives to other people's perfectly curated highlight reels of togetherness. Another advanced phrase is a high-performance optimization process. This sounds like upgrading a machine to work better. For example, living alone can feel like a high-performance optimization process for your brain. Or personal growth is sometimes a high-performance optimization process rather than a quick change. You will also hear a complete reboot of your internal operating system. This is a technology metaphor. For example, after a difficult year, therapy felt like a complete reboot of her internal operating system. Or spending time alone can be a complete reboot of your internal operating system. The phrase, your brain's background apps, is another modern metaphor. It compares the brain to a smartphone running programs in the background. For example, when you are stressed, your brain's background apps are working overtime. Or silence allows your brain's background apps to slow down. You may here become the pilot of your own emotional state. This means taking control of your feelings instead of reacting automatically. For example, instead of blaming others, he learned to become the pilot of his own emotional state. Or emotional maturity begins when you become the pilot of your own emotional state. Another advanced phrase is outsource your emotional regulation. This means letting other people manage your emotions for you. For example, constantly calling a friend to calm down can mean you are outsourcing your emotional regulation. Or true independence begins when you stop outsourcing your emotional regulation. You will also hear building new neural pathways for self-reliance. This describes how the brain physically changes when you practice independence. For example, solving problems alone is building new neural pathways for self-reliance. Or every time you calm yourself down, you are building new neural pathways for self-reliance. The phrase, the CEO of your brain, refers to the prefrontal cortex. For example, planning your future activates the CEO of your brain, or strong discipline shows that the CEO of your brain is working effectively. You may also hear executive function muscles. This suggests that thinking skills can be trained like physical muscles. For example, managing your own finances strengthens your executive function muscles, or daily planning exercises your executive function muscles. Another relatable phrase is panic socializing. This means filling your schedule just to avoid feeling lonely. For example, she realized she was panic socializing instead of resting. Or constantly attending events can sometimes be panic socializing. The phrase short-term dopamine hit describes quick pleasure that does not last long. For example, checking your phone gives a short-term dopamine hit, or buying something new can provide a short-term dopamine hit. You will also hear living alone creates the perfect laboratory for creativity. This metaphor compares your home to a science lab for ideas. For example, silence can turn your apartment into the perfect laboratory for creativity. Or spending weekends alone creates the perfect laboratory for creativity. Another memorable phrase is the legendary flow state. This describes deep focus and complete concentration. For example, writers often search for the legendary flow state, or when you forget about time while working, you may be in the legendary flow state. The emotional phrase, a dark room inside of us, refers to hidden fears and past pain. For example, avoiding silence can keep you from entering the dark room inside of you. Or personal growth often begins when you face the dark room inside of you. You will also hear a powerful contrast. Living alone isn't about isolation. It's about integration. This means being alone is not about loneliness, but about becoming whole. For example, true independence isn't about isolation. It's about integration. Or healing isn't about isolation. It's about integration. Finally, the phrase, build the single most important connection, the one with yourself, reminds us that self-relationship matters most. For example, time alone helps you build the single most important connection, the one with yourself, or confidence grows when you build the single most important connection, the one with yourself. You may notice that some phrases in the episode repeat patterns like living alone, what if, or it's not, it's. This repetition is not a mistake. It is a rhetorical technique. It adds emphasis and makes the message stronger and more memorable. Now that you understand these powerful phrases, you are fully prepared to listen deeply and notice how they are used in context.
Let's talk about living alone. For some people, it's the absolute dream, right? Total freedom. For others, it feels like a sign that something's gone wrong. But what if our brains have a completely different take on it? Today, we're diving into why flying solo might just be the greatest privilege your mind can experience. So is it a sign of failure? Or is it a powerful privilege for your brain? I mean, that's a tough question, especially these days. You scroll through social media and all you see are these perfectly curated highlight reels of togetherness. Happy couples, huge friend groups. It's so easy to see why living by yourself could feel like you're being left on the sidelines. But what's fascinating is that neuroscience and psychology suggest something else is going on entirely. What if this period of your life isn't a setback at all? What if it's actually a high-performance optimization process for your brain? Like a complete and total reboot of your internal operating system. So here's how we're going to break it down. We're going to look at how living alone messes with your brain's background apps, how it helps you become your own pilot, trains your inner CEO, acts as a social filter, turns your space into a creativity lab, and ultimately, how it helps you finally meet your inner self. Okay, first up, let's talk about your brain's background app. This whole process is managed by a really cool system called the Default Mode Network. So, what in the world is the Default Mode Network, or DMN? Well, the easiest way to think about it is like a background program running on your computer. When you're just daydreaming or your mind is wandering, not focused on anything specific, the DMN kicks into gear. Its main job? To process information about you, your past, your future, and how you fit in with other people. And here is where the massive shift happens. See, when you live with other people, your DMN is constantly chewing on external data. Your roommate's weird schedule, that comment a colleague made, what your family expects of you. Your mental energy is always directed outward. But when you live alone, all that external noise just fades away. The DMN gets to reset, and it shifts its focus inward. For maybe the first time, you have the quiet to actually hear your own signals. when you're tired, what you actually want, what you're really thinking. And once you start hearing those internal signals, you've got to learn what to do with them. Which brings us to our second point. Living alone basically forces you to become the pilot of your own emotional state. Just think about it for a second. When you have a really bad day, maybe your boss was totally unfair or you got into a dumb argument with a friend, what's your very first instinct? For so many of us, it's to grab our phone and just vent to someone, right? We kind of outsource our emotional regulation. And yeah, it feels good in the moment, but it can create this pattern of emotional dependency. But when you live alone, that immediate outlet just isn't always there. You're actually forced to sit with that uncomfortable feeling, to really learn how to soothe yourself, to analyze the problem and figure out what to do next. And every single time you navigate a feeling on your own, you are literally building new neural pathways for self-reliance. You stop being a passenger in your own emotional life, and you start taking the controls as the pilot. All right, number 3. Living alone is one of the most intense training camps you could ever put the CEO of your brain through. And that CEO is your prefrontal cortex. I mean, just look at the difference here. In a shared life, big decisions can be pushed off or shared. Problems? Maybe someone else will solve it. Discipline often comes from outside prompts. Your prefrontal cortex, that part of your brain that handles planning and problem solving, it can get a little bit lazy. But in a solo life, you have total ownership. Every decision, every budget, every time the sink gets clogged, it's all on you. Now, that isn't a burden. It's a workout. You're strengthening those executive function muscles every single day. The fourth benefit is a really fascinating one: solitude. It acts as this incredibly powerful social filter. It basically forces you to choose quality over quantity. You know, one of the biggest fears about living alone is, of course, loneliness. And to fight this, a lot of people fall into a trap called panic socializing. You know what I'm talking about. Filling up their calendars with anything and everything just to avoid an empty house. It's this constant chase for a short-term dopamine hit from fun that's just surface level. But something amazing happens when you get comfortable with solitude. A mental switch flips. Your time becomes this precious, precious resource. You move from just filling time to actually investing time. You start almost subconsciously weighing the cost-benefit of social plans. Is this 5-hour party really worth it? Or would I rather spend that energy on a deep, one-on-one conversation with a close friend? You naturally start prioritizing connections that are truly meaningful. Okay, number 5. Living alone creates the absolute perfect laboratory for creativity. It gives you unparalleled access to the legendary flow state. Now, this idea that solitude fuels creativity, it's not new. Virginia Woolf famously said that to create art, one needs a room of one's own. And she wasn't just talking about a physical space. She meant mental space, too. And that's where flow comes in. Flow is that magical state where you're so totally immersed in something that you completely lose track of time. But the number one requirement for flow is zero interruptions. Every text message that buzzes, every person who walks into the room, it can shatter that fragile state. Living alone provides the perfect environment to disconnect and achieve that deep, focused concentration, which can dramatically boost your creativity and your productivity. And this brings us to our final and maybe the most profound point of all, the journey of meeting your true inner self. We all have what you could call a dark room inside of us. It's the place we store our past traumas, our deepest fears, all our insecurities. And in our busy, noisy modern lives, we use other people and constant activity as a way to avoid ever having to go into that room. But living alone, it takes away those distractions. The silence forces you to finally turn around and face what's inside. And yeah, at first it's really difficult, but slowly you learn to just coexist with those uncomfortable feelings. You start to understand where they even came from. And then eventually you learn to accept them, not as flaws, but just as part of who you are. This process, this is where true, deep healing actually happens. So, you see, living alone isn't really about isolation. It's about integration. It's the opportunity to build the single most important connection you will ever have, the one with yourself. And when you come out of this period, you don't just re-enter the world, you re-enter it as a stronger, more complete person. And that ultimately makes you a better friend and a better partner. So we'll just leave you with this question to think about. For those of you who've lived alone, what's the most profound lesson that time has taught you? We would genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.
So today wasn't just about living alone. It wasn't just about silence or independence or having your own space. It was about understanding what that space is doing to you. Living alone is not simply a life situation. It is a mental experience, an emotional training ground, a quiet transformation. It teaches you how to listen to yourself. It teaches you how to calm yourself. It teaches you how to make decisions without constant reassurance. Because growth is not always loud. Sometimes it happens in the evenings when no one is watching. Sometimes it happens when you solve a problem on your own. Sometimes it happens when you sit in silence and don't run from it. Living alone is not about isolation. It is about integration. It is about bringing together your fears, your strengths, your past, and your future, and learning to accept all of it. You may not notice the change immediately, but slowly you become more stable, more self-aware, more emotionally independent. And that kind of confidence is quiet. It doesn't need attention. It simply exists. So this week, instead of avoiding alone time, try something different. Sit in silence for 10 minutes. Go for a walk without your phone. Have dinner without distraction. Notice what comes up. Notice what you learn. Because confidence does not grow from constant noise. It grows from connection. The connection you build with yourself. If today's episode helped you see living alone in a new way, please like this video so more learners can discover it too. Subscribe to the Koala English Podcast for weekly conversations that help you grow. Not only your English, but your mindset. And I would truly love to hear from you. Finish this sentence in the comments. Living alone taught me. Make it honest. Make it personal. Make it real. Thank you for spending this quiet time with me. And I'll see you in the next episode.